Hello everyone, this is Glenda and welcome back to Creative Grandma. It's Stitch of the Week time, and this week's stitch is a Tunisian stitch pattern. It's stitch number 73 and it's called the Raised Diagonal Tunisian Stitch. You can make your stitch width as wide as you want. Now I use 5 because I kind of wanted to be in the middle of the stitch range. You can do this with 3 stitches, 4 stitches, 5 stitches, 10 stitches, however wide you want your stripes, depending on what you are making. If you're making an afghan and you want to have that wider stitch pattern, you can go with maybe 10 stitches. So the multiple of this stitch pattern, now for this specific one here, again, I chose 5 stitches for my repeat. Because we're using 2 different stitches, you're taking the multiple of 5 for this stitch and 5 for that. So your multiple will be 10, and then you add 2, 1 for the beginning stitch and 1 for your end stitch. So for this pattern specifically, it's a multiple of 10 plus 2. So if you want to change the width of your stitch pattern, then you would take however many stitches. If you want this to be 10 stitches instead of 5, you would have 10 regular stitches, 10 purl stitches, which creates 20 stitches. So your multiple would be 20 plus 2 for the first and last stitch. If you decide you only want 3 stitches, then you take the 3 regular stitches and the 3 purl stitches. That creates a total of 6 stitches. Then your multiple would be a total of 6 plus 2. So figure your multiple by however many stitches you want in your diagonal stripes. So take however many stitches times 2 and then add 2 stitches. So the pattern in this video here, the written pattern for Stitch of the Week, is specifically written for the 5 stitch pattern repeat. So if you get the pattern from my website or you click the link in the description box, it's going to be written exactly for this pattern here. You will have to make adjustments if you change your stitch width. So let me show you my 3 samples I have for you today. This first sample here is made with a self-striping yarn. You can see how it just changes those colors automatically. Very, very nice if you don't like to change colors and weave in ends. Now this was made using the Lion brand Landscapes yarn. Let me see what color this is. This is color number 201 Boardwalk. You can see all those bright colors here in the center. I'll pull them out and you can see those colors are here, and this is how this yarn works up. So that's the first sample. The second sample I have here is made with my solid white, and again, I love those crisp, clean, solid white samples. I'm trying to see how you can see this pattern the best because I am white on white, so I hope you can see the diagonal stripes coming down. So that's what it looks like done in a solid color. It's not a real high raised design. It's more of a textured, it just is a slight raise to the design, but it's a wonderful look. My third sample here is made with a short color burst multicolor, and this was made using Karen's Simply Soft paints, and this was color number 21015 Baby Brights. So this again shows you how that yarn works up in this pattern. So just a beautiful pattern, and you can see those soft, delicate diagonal stripes. I just think this is wonderful if you just want to make a nice, delicate baby afghan, or you want to make just something that has a little bit of texture but just an unusual design, just to give it that wow factor. So these are my 3 samples. So for today's project, now I'm using a 4 medium weight yarn, and I'm using a size 10.5K 6.5 millimeter afghan hook. So grab your yarn, grab your afghan hook. I'll meet you back here and we'll get this pattern started. I tied my yarn around my hook. So the multiple for this stitch pattern here is a multiple of 10 plus 2. So I'm going to do a smaller sample and I'm going to chain 22. So yarn over, pull through, that's 1, yarn over, pull through, that's 2, yarn over, pull through, that's 3. Continue until you have 22 chains, and I'll be back and we'll get row 1 started. I have my chain 22 finished, and the first row is just going to be the simple stitch. The loop on your hook counts as your first stitch. You're going to skip this first chain, you're going to go into the second chain, yarn over, and pull through. You keep that loop on your hook. Insert your hook under the top loop of that next chain, yarn over, pull through, and keep your loops on the hook. Insert into the next chain, yarn over, and pull through. So you're just going to continue in that manner across and work in your last chain. Insert into the next chain, yarn over, and pull through. When you're done and at the end of the row, you should have a total of 22 loops on your hook. I'm going to go ahead and finish, and I'll meet you at the end of row 1. I'm over at the end of row 1, and with Tunisian stitch, when you start, whatever amount of chains that you chained in your foundation chain is the amount of loops you should have on your hook when working the simple stitch. I chained 22. I have a total of 22 loops on my hook for the simple stitch, and now we're going to take our loops off the hook. So each row has 2 parts. You have your forward part of the row where you put your loops on the hook, and you have the second part of the row where you take your loops off. Now we're going to take our loops off, and this is the second part of row 1. You're going to yarn over and pull through 1 loop only. Then you're going to yarn over and pull through 2. Yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, and you're just going to continue working a yarn over and pull through 2 loops all the way across your work. So I'm just going to work right down the row, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, continue. We're almost to the end. I'm sorry if I'm working quickly. You can just pause the video if I'm going too fast. And then when you get to the end of the row, you should have 2 loops, and you're going to yarn over, pull through both loops, and then this loop on your hook, when you're all finished with row 1, counts as the first stitch of the next row. So now we're going to start row 2, and we're going to start our diagonal pattern. So again, with this pattern, our stitch count is 5 regular stitches and 5 purl stitches. We're going to insert our hook into the first vertical stitch just underneath the stitch, nothing else, just underneath that strand of thread. Yarn over, pull through and underneath that bar, and you're going to keep that loop on the hook. That's 1. Insert under the next vertical stitch, yarn over, pull underneath and through that stitch, that's 2. Insert into the next vertical stitch, yarn over, pull through, that's 3. Insert into the next vertical stitch, yarn over, pull through, that's 4. Insert into the next vertical stitch, yarn over, and pull through, that's 5. So for this pattern, you do not count the first and last stitch. You just ignore this stitch. This is always going to be the first loop on your hook as a regular stitch, and the last loop that you work is going to be a regular stitch. So you always start your stitch pattern in the next stitch. So we're starting with our 5 simple. Now we're going to make our 5 purl stitches. Now with the purl stitches, your yarn has to be in front of your work. Now I do this maybe in a strange way. You have to figure out the best way to get your yarn in front of your work. We're going to work those 5 purl stitches. I'm so used to having my hand behind my work, what I do to make that purl stitch, and again, if you have a certain way that you make the purl stitch, then by all means do it your way. I take my yarn and I bring it from the back to the front and up over top the loop of my hook. You bring your hook to the front of your work, insert it underneath that vertical strand, drop that yarn down to the bottom of your hook to the base of that stitch, and take it from the front to the back, wrap it around your hook, and pull it through that stitch. And that creates your purl stitch. So that's our first one. Take that yarn from the back to the front up over the top of your hook and just pull your hook to the front of your work. This is making the hook do the work and bring that yarn forward. You're going to insert into the next vertical stitch, drop your yarn down to the bottom of your hook and the bottom of that stitch, and you're going to go from front to back and then from back up around the top of your hook, and then you're going to pull it through that stitch. That's your second purl stitch. I'm really doing this in slow motion so you can get the hang of how you want to move your yarn. Again, let the hook do the work. If you hold your hand with your yarn to the back, you need to bring that yarn to the front of the work, so I come from back to front up over the hook. Take your hook and bring it forward so the hook is bringing your yarn to the front of the work. Insert into that next vertical stitch. Drop that yarn down to the bottom of the stitch in the front of the work. Wrap it to the back, take it to the back, and then bring the yarn from the back to the front around the top of the hook and pull it through the stitch. That's your third purl stitch. So let's do it again. Take your yarn from the back to the front and up over the top of the hook. Bring your hook forward in front of the next stitch. You're going to insert into that next vertical stitch. Drop your yarn down to the bottom of the stitch and to the bottom of the hook. Take it from front to back and then from back to front around the front of your hook, and then pull it through the stitch. That's 4. We need to make one more purl stitch. Take your yarn from the back to the front and put it up over your hook. Take your hook and bring it forward so it pushes the yarn to the front of your work. Insert your hook into the next vertical stitch. Drop the yarn down to the bottom of the stitch and the bottom of the hook. Take it from the front to the back and then from the back to the front around the top of the hook. Grab your yarn and pull it through that stitch. You just made your 5 purl stitches. So that was our first repeat with the 5 simple stitches and then the 5 purl stitches. So that is the end of the repeat where we worked 5 simple stitches and then 5 purl stitches. So this first row, I'm going to work each stitch with you. So let's begin. Insert into the next stitch. Again, this starts the repeat. Insert into that vertical stitch, yarn over, pull through. That's 1. Insert into the next stitch, yarn over, pull through. That's 2. Insert into the next stitch, yarn over, pull through. That's 3. Insert into the next stitch, yarn over, pull through. That's 4. Insert into the next stitch, yarn over, pull through, and that's 5. Now we need to make our 5 purl stitches. Take your yarn from the back to the front and around the hook. Take your hook, push it forward so you're bringing the yarn to the front of the work. Insert into that stitch. Drop your yarn down to the bottom of the stitch and to the base of your hook. Take it from front to back, wrap it around the top of the hook, bringing it to the front, and then pull it through that stitch. That's your first purl stitch. You're going to take your yarn and bring it to the front of your work in front of your hook and up over the top. Take your hook and push that yarn forward so you bring it to the front of the work. Insert into that next vertical stitch. Drop that yarn down to the bottom of the stitch from front to back. Bring it from the back to the front right over the top of the hook and pull it through the stitch. That's your second purl stitch. Take your yarn and bring it to the front of your work and over the top of your hook. Push that hook forward, insert it into that next vertical stitch, Drop your yarn down to the base of that stitch. Take your yarn from front to back and then wrap it from the back to the front over the top of the hook and then pull it through the stitch. Now, row 1, I'm showing you in detail how to do this stitch. The rest of the rows, I'm just going to do the stitch. So I don't want to make the video extremely long. So row 1, that's why I'm getting so detailed with this purl stitch if you've never done it. So before you really start this pattern, you might want to practice this on your swatch before you actually begin a big project. We need to make 2 more purl stitches. So again, you're going to take that yarn and bring it to the front of your work and up over the top of your hook. Let your hook push that yarn forward to the front of your work. Insert in the next vertical stitch. Drop that yarn down to the base of the stitch, to the bottom of your hook, and from front to back. Take it from the back and bring it across the top of the hook to the front and pull it through the stitch. We need to do 1 more purl stitch. So take your yarn from the front up over the top of the hook and use your hook and push the hook forward and bring that yarn to the front. You're going to insert into the next vertical stitch. Drop your yarn back to the front bottom of that stitch. Take it from front to back and then from the back across the top of your hook to the front and pull through the stitch. Now we're over to our last stitch, and again the first and the last stitch is a regular simple stitch. So to end the row, we're going in both loops of this ending stitch. You're going to go into the top loop and then you're going to grab that back loop. So you want to grab both those loops for the ending stitch. Yarn over and pull through both vertical bars. So now the first part of row 2 is finished, and now we're going to take our loops off the hook. So to take your loops off the hook is the same with each row. So let me show you. You're going to yarn over and pull through 1 loop only. To take the rest of the loops off, you're going to yarn over, pull through 2. Yarn over, pull through 2. Yarn over, pull through 2, and you're going to continue with the yarn over and pull through 2. So yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. I'm going to go ahead and work right down to the end of the row. And again, the second part of each row is worked in exactly the same manner. Now I'm over and I have 2 loops left. You're going to yarn over, you're going to pull through both loops at the end of the row, and you have 1 loop remaining, and this loop counts as the first stitch of that next row. So now we're going to go ahead and start row 3. With row 3, we worked our 5 stitches, so we're at our max, and now we're going to change over and start with the purl stitch. So again, I'm just going to say which stitch I'm doing and work them. So if you need practice, learn the stitches and then come back to this pattern. So you can make a swatch and just work on that purl stitch if you wish, if you need more help with doing the stitches. So again, we're at our max. We worked our 5 stitches. So we want to start our diagonal pattern, and we're going to offset each row by 1 stitch. So now we're going to work a purl stitch for the first stitch. So I'm making a purl stitch. We're just making 1. And then we're going to start with our 5 regular Tunisian stitches and then work the 5 purl stitches. So now we're jumping to the regular stitch, insert into the next stitch. We're working 5 stitches in the simple stitch. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And you can see that our 5th stitch is going into the first stitch of that purl stitch below, and that's what starts the diagonal. Now we're going to work 5 purl stitches. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now we're going to jump back and work 5 regular simple stitches. And you can see 5, 5, and 5. Insert into the next stitch and let's start our 5 simple stitches. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now we're at the end of the row, and the last stitch is always a simple stitch, so you can see we only have 4 stitches to work our purl stitches. And this is where the diagonal comes in, because each time you get to the end of the row, you'll be 1 less stitch, and then you work that regular stitch. So you just work the pattern over until it ends. So if you're working the purl stitch, you work the purl stitch over to within that last stitch. So however many stitches are here in the last repeat is how many you work, and you leave that last stitch as a regular simple stitch. So let's work our 4 purl stitches. There's 1, 2, 3, and 4. So you can see we're at the end of the row, and now we're going to work our regular stitch in the last stitch. We're going to insert our hook in both loops, the top loop and then that one behind it. So you want to work in both loops, which gives you a wonderful edge when you come around to put your border on. Yarn over and pull through both vertical loops at the end. Now with row 3 is the start of our repeat rows. Now this has a 10 row repeat because we're using the 10 stitches. So if you use less stitches, you're going to have less repeat rows. If you use more stitches, then you're going to have more repeat rows. So let's keep going. We're going to take our loops off the hook now. Again, they're always taken off in the same manner. You're going to yarn over and pull through 1 loop only. Yarn over and pull through 2. Yarn over and pull through 2. Continue until you have 1 loop on your hook. And again, when you get to the end, you have 2 loops. You yarn over, pull through. You have 1 loop remaining, and that counts as the first stitch of the next row. So again, if you need help with this pattern, you're going to click back to the start of row 3. So we're going to work row 3 to row 12. And when you get to row 13, you're going to jump back to row 3 and work to row 12 again. Now you can stop this pattern at any row in between row 3 and row 12, and then I'll also show you how to do the last finishing row so you keep that pattern. So let's continue and get the rest of our rows made, and as we progress with this pattern, you're going to see how the pattern is going to start creating that diagonal pattern here. So for row 4, we already made 1 purl stitch in the last row. So this row, we're going to work 2 purl stitches. So let's begin. We're going to work a purl stitch in that next vertical bar. That's 1. Purl stitch in the next vertical bar. And that's 2. Now we're going to start our repeat, and we're going to work 5 regular simple stitches and then 5 purl stitches, and we're going to repeat that across to the last 9 stitches. So let's begin. So we're going to begin with the simple stitch and work 5 simple stitches. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And you'll notice that the 5th stitch is going into the first purl stitch of the previous row. Now we're going to work 5 purl stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that is the end of the repeat. So if you're working on a larger project, you would continue working that repeat of 5 simple stitches across and then 5 purl stitches until you get to the last 9 stitches. To end the row, you're going to work 5 regular simple stitches, 3 purl stitches, and 1 regular simple stitch in that last stitch. So let's continue. We're going to work 1 simple stitch in each of the next 5 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We're going to work 3 purl stitches, 1 in each of the next 3 stitches. There's our first purl stitch. That's 2. And that's 3. We're over to the last stitch, and we always work a regular simple stitch into this last stitch. You're going to go in both strands of that last stitch, so make sure you do not go in this stitch. You want to go in the very edge stitch and then the one behind. Yarn over and pull through both vertical bars. We're going to take our loops off, yarn over, pull through 1 only, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, continue with the yarn over and pull through 2 until you work yourself down and have 1 loop remaining on your hook. I have 1 loop on the hook, and that counts as my first stitch of row 5. So let's see if you can see the diagonal starting. So when you lay it down, each section is offset by 1 stitch every time you do the next row. So let's go ahead and begin row 5. Row 4, we started with 2 purl stitches, so row 5, we're going to start with 3. We're going to work 1 purl stitch in each of the next 3 stitches. There's 1, 2, and 3. Now we're going to start the repeat of row 5. We're going to work 1 simple stitch in each of the next 5 stitches, and then we're going to work 1 purl stitch in each of the next 5 stitches. You will repeat that across until you get to the last 8 stitches. So if you're working on a larger project, you just keep working that repeat of 5 simple stitches, then 5 purl stitches, repeat that over to the last 8 stitches, and then we're going to work 5 simple stitches, 2 purl stitches, and then 1 stitch into that last stitch. So if you're a more advanced crocheter, you can go ahead and work across. So now I'm going to finish this row. So let's begin. We're going to start with 1 simple stitch in each of the next 5 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We're going to work 1 purl stitch in each of the next 5 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that is the end of the repeat. So go ahead and repeat that if you're working on a larger project across until you get to the last 8 stitches. So I'm over to the last 8 stitches. We only did the 1 repeat. So again, if you're working a larger project, just click back on that video until you get to the start of the repeat and work it across your project. Now we're going to finish the row. We're at the last 8 stitches. We're going to work 1 simple stitch in each of the next 5 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So how this pattern works is, because we're going on the diagonal, if you try to work your 5 purl stitches next, you realize you don't have enough stitches. So this is where, when you start working this pattern, you can just work the pattern. You just keep working 5, 5, and 5, and then work however many stitches is here and put that last regular simple stitch in that last stitch. So we're at our purl stitch. We have 2 stitches. We're going to work 1 purl stitch in each of those 2 stitches. So insert into that next stitch, work a purl stitch, that's 1, work a purl stitch in the next stitch, and then we're over to our end stitch. You're going to insert into that top vertical end bar and into the one behind it. So you have 2 vertical bars for that last stitch, yarn over and pull through. The first part of row 5 is finished, and now we're just going to take our loops off in the same manner as each row. Yarn over, pull through 1, yarn over, pull through 2, continue until you have 1 loop on your hook. So I'm over to my last loop. So now to begin row 6, row 5, we work 3 purl stitches. So for row 6, we're going to start and work 4 purl stitches. So we're going to work 1 purl stitch in each of the next 4 stitches. Insert into that next stitch, work a purl stitch, that's 1. 2, 3, and 4. Now you start the repeat. You're going to work 5 simple stitches, 1 in each of the next 5 stitches, and then you're going to work 5 purl stitches, 1 in each of the next 5 stitches. You'll repeat that across to your last 7 stitches. So if you need help, this is the start of the repeat. Insert into the next stitch, work a simple stitch, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now we're going to work 1 purl stitch in each of the next 5 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So you work that over to the last 7 stitches, and then we're going to continue the pattern, and we're going to work 1 simple stitch in each of the next 5 stitches, then 1 purl stitch, and end with 1 regular simple stitch. So insert into the next stitch, work a simple stitch, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We're going to work a purl stitch in this next stitch. Now we're over to our last stitch, and we're going to go into the very last edge stitch, that vertical bar, and then right in the one underneath behind it. yarn over, pull through both strands of that bar, that vertical bar, and then you're ready to take your loops off. Again, yarn over, pull through one, yarn over, pull through two, continue until you have one loop on your hook. I'm over to one loop on my hook. Let's look at our work. You can see how your diagonal pattern is forming because we're offsetting by one stitch in each row. So by now you should be getting the idea of how this pattern works. So let's begin row 7. The last row we did 4 purl stitch in the beginning, so now we're going to do 5. So let's begin. We're going to work 1 purl stitch in each of the next 5 stitches. Insert into the next stitch, work that purl stitch. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now we're going to start our repeat. We're going to start and work 1 simple stitch in each of the next 5 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We're going to work 1 purl stitch in each of the next 5 stitches. That's our first purl stitch. That's 2, 3, 4, and 5. That is the end of the repeat, and you would continue on until you get to the last 6 stitches. So we're already at the last 6 stitches, so we're going to end with 6 regular simple stitches. Now the reason you have 6 instead of 5 is because we're working our 1 simple stitch in each of the next 5 stitches, but because we're over to the end, then you work that regular simple stitch into that very last stitch. So that's the only time you will have 6 of the same stitches, is when you're at the start or the end of the row. So let's continue on. We're going to work 1 simple stitch in each of the remaining stitches. Insert into the next stitch, work a simple stitch. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And again, we're over to that last stitch, and the last stitch is always a regular Tunisian simple stitch. Insert into the very top edge vertical bar, and then insert into the one right behind it, yarn over, and pull through both vertical bars. You're going to take your loops off, yarn over, pull through one only, and then for the remaining loops, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, continue until you have 1 loop remaining on your hook. So we're halfway through the pattern, and again you can see we worked our regular simple stitch with that purl up the side. So now we're at our maximum of our 5 stitches of those purl stitches, so we need to start all over again, but we're going to start with the regular simple stitch for the start of row 8. We're going to start row 8. So row 7 we worked the max of those 5 stitches, so now we're going to start with a regular simple stitch. The loop on your hook counts as the first stitch, so you're going to insert into that next vertical stitch and work a simple stitch. Now we're going to work our repeat. The The repeat will be, you're going to work 1 purl stitch in each of the next 5 stitches. Then you're going to work 1 simple stitch in each of the next 5 stitches. So let's begin. Work a purl stitch in the next vertical bar. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now you're going to work 1 simple stitch in each of the next 5 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now for row 8, the pattern will come right out to the end of your repeat. So if you have a longer project, go ahead and continue that repeat. And now we're going to finish our sample on row 8. We're going to work 1 purl stitch in each of the next 5 stitches. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So when you look at your work, you can see we have a total of 5 stitches remaining. We're going to work 1 simple stitch in each of the next 4 stitches, and then the last stitch we're going to work that simple stitch going through both loops on the edge of our work. So let's begin. Insert into the next vertical bar, work a simple stitch. That's 1, 2, 3, and 4. You're going to insert your hook under the top edge vertical bar and into the one below. Yarn over and pull through both loops. Yarn over, you're going to pull through 1 loop only to start the return row. Yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. Continue until you have 1 loop left on your hook. I have 1 loop on my hook, and that counts as the first stitch of row 9. I'll be right back and we'll get row 9 started. We're ready to start row 9. Now row 8, we started with 1 regular simple stitch. So row 9, we're going to start and work 2 simple stitches. We're going to work 1 simple stitch in each of the next 2 vertical bars. Insert your hook into the next vertical bar and work a simple stitch. That's 1. Insert into the next stitch, work a simple stitch, and that's 2. Now you're going to start your repeat. You're going to work 1 purl stitch in each of the next 5 stitches, and then 1 simple stitch in each of the next 5 stitches, and we're going to work that across to the last 9 stitches. So let's begin. We're going to work 1 purl stitch in each of the next 5 stitches. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We're going to work 1 simple stitch in each of the next 5 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. If you're working on a larger project, then you'd click back on the video, start from the start of the repeat, work your repeat across until you get to the last 9 stitches. We're going to work 5 purl stitches now. We are over to our last 9 stitches, and we're going to work 1 purl stitch in each of the next 5 stitches. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We're going to work a simple stitch in each of the next 3 stitches. Insert into the next vertical bar, work a simple stitch. That's 1, 2, and 3. We're over to the last loop of the row, the last stitch. Insert right into the edge stitch, the last vertical bar, and the one right below it. Yarn over and pull through both strands. You're going to take your stitches off, yarn over, pull through 1, and for the remaining loops, yarn over and pull through 2. Continue until you have 1 loop on your hook. Yarn over and pull through 2. I'm at the end of row 9. I have 1 loop on my hook, and that counts as the first stitch of row 10. So let's begin row 10. We're going to start and we're going to work 1 simple stitch in each of the next 3 stitches. Insert into that next vertical bar, work a simple stitch. That's 1, 2, and 3. Now you're going to start your repeat. You're going to work 1 purl stitch in each of the next 5 stitches, and then you're going to work 1 simple stitch in each of the next 5 stitches. If you're working on a longer project, keep repeating that repeat until you get to the last 8 stitches. So let's begin. We're going to work 1 purl stitch in each of the next 5 stitches. Insert into that next stitch, work a purl stitch. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now you're going to work 1 simple stitch in each of the next 5 stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that is the end of the repeat. So now we're over to the last 8 stitches, and we're going to end with 1 purl stitch in each of the next 5 stitches. So let's begin. Insert into the next stitch and work a purl stitch. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We're going to work 1 simple stitch in each of the next 2 vertical bars. Insert into that next vertical bar, work a simple stitch. That's 1, and then 2. We're over to our last stitch, and we always end with a simple stitch, and we're going into the top edge of that last vertical bar and then the one behind it. Yarn over and pull through both vertical bars. Now you're going to take your loops off in the same manner. Yarn over, pull through 1 only. And then for the remaining loops, yarn over and pull through 2. Yarn over, pull through 2. By now you know how to take your loops off. Each return row is worked in the same manner. So continue working yarn over and through 2 loops until you have 1 loop remaining on your hook. I have 1 loop on my hook. This is what your work should look like at this point, and you can see how your diagonal pattern is forming in your work. So we have 2 more rows to go for our repeat rows. So let's begin. This is the start of row 11. We're going to begin with 4 simple stitches in the start of the row. So we're going to work 1 simple stitch in each of the next 4 stitches. Insert into that next vertical bar, work a simple stitch. That's 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now you're going to start your repeat. You're going to work 1 purl stitch in each of the next 5 stitches, and then 1 simple stitch in each of the next 5 stitches, and you'll repeat that across until you get to the last 7 stitches. So this is the start of the repeat. We're going to work 1 purl stitch in each of the next 5 stitches. Insert into that next stitch, work your purl stitch. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We're going to work 1 regular simple stitch in each of the next 5 stitches. Insert into that next vertical bar, work a simple stitch. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that is the end of the repeat. So again, if you're working on an Afghan or a larger project, this is your repeat. Click back on the video and repeat across until you get to the last 7 stitches. So we're over to our last 7 stitches. So now we're going to finish the row, and we're going to work 1 purl stitch in each of the next 5 stitches. Insert into that next stitch, work a purl stitch. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We're going to work a regular simple stitch into the next vertical bar, insert into that next vertical stitch, work a simple stitch. We're over to the end of the row, and we're going to work a simple stitch into the last 2 strands of that edge of the stitch. Insert into the last vertical bar, and then in the one behind. Yarn over, pull through both strands. Now we're ready to take off our loops, and again we do it in the same manner. Yarn over, pull through 1 only to start, and for the remaining loops you're going to yarn over and pull through 2. Continue until you have 1 loop remaining on your hook. Row 11 is finished. This is what your work should look like. We have 1 row remaining in our repeat rows, and then we'll have our max of 5 stitches of the simple stitch, and then we're going to switch over and start with row 3 where we start with the purl stitch. So very nice pattern, just a wonderful repeat. Once you work this, you can see by now how the pattern is starting to form. You're getting a little more familiar. So let's jump right in and get row 12 started and finish this pattern. To begin row 12, we're going to start and we're going to work 1 simple stitch in each of the next 5 stitches. Insert into that next vertical stitch, work a simple stitch. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now you're going to start your repeat. Your repeat will be, you're going to work 1 purl stitch in each of the next 5 stitches, and then you're going to work 1 simple stitch in each of the next 5 stitches. You'll repeat that across until you get to the last 6 stitches. So let's begin the repeat. Again, the start of the repeat, you're going to work 1 purl stitch in each of the next 5 stitches. Insert into that next vertical stitch and work a purl stitch. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We're going to work 1 simple stitch in each of the next 5 stitches. Insert into that next vertical bar, work a simple stitch. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that is the end of the repeat. Again, if you're working on a larger project, I hate to keep repeating myself, but you would start at the beginning of the repeat, work to the end of the repeat, and continue until you get to the last 6 stitches. Because we're only doing the 1 repeat, we're already over at our last 6 stitches. We're going to end the row and we're going to work 1 purl stitch in each of the next 5 stitches. Insert into the next vertical bar and work your first purl stitch. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We're over to our last vertical bar, our last stitch. You're going to insert right into the last vertical stitch and then the one right behind it. Yarn over, pull through both strands, and then you're going to take your loops off. Again, you start by yarning over and through 1 loop only. The remaining loops, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, continue across until you have 1 loop on your hook. I have 1 loop on my hook, and that will count as the first stitch of the next row. So this is the end of the repeat rows. This is the end of the pattern, but I have 1 more row to show you, and that's going to be your finishing row. Now I'm going to show you how to do the finishing row based on ending on row 12, but the method is the same. So if you are working on a project and you have to stop in the middle of this pattern on a different row, what you do is you'll jump up to the next row and finish the last row in the manner that I show you the finishing row by slipping those stitches off, but you have to do the next row to finish off. So I'll explain that to you as I'm showing you the finishing row. But for this pattern, the pattern is finished. So now if you want to continue and you're working a longer afghan or a sweater, so then you need to jump back and you're going to repeat rows 3 through 12 for the pattern. Now let me show you how to finish the row. So when you're ready to finish your afghan or you want to bind this off, let me show you how to finish. So I did row 12. So what you want to do to finish your work is whatever row you finish, this is going to be my last row, row 12, but the pattern repeats from row 3 to row 12, so I have to jump back to row 3, which would be my next row. So if you end on, say, row 8, then you need to finish off by following row 9. If you finish on row 3, you need to finish off by following row 4. So let me show you what I mean. I really don't mean to confuse you. It's just this is a more complicated pattern. It's easy, but it's complicated based on how many different versions you can do based on how many stitches or how many rows. So let's do the finishing row. I finished on row 12. The next row, if I was making this longer, would be row 3. So I'm using row 3 as a guide to finish off. So row 3 says I'm to start with a purl stitch. So you do not want to just finish off by slip stitching, or you'll have this as a regular row. You need to form your stitches before you fasten off the row in order to keep that pattern consistent. So let's begin our finishing row. We're going to start with a purl stitch. So insert into that next vertical bar, work your purl stitch. Instead of leaving the loop on the hook, you're going to pull it through that other loop on your hook, and you're going to take your loops down to one loop. You'll always have one loop on your hook on your finishing row. So now we're going to start the repeat. We're going to work one simple stitch in each of the next 5 stitches. And then we're going to work one purl stitch in each of the next 5 stitches, and we're going to continue across our row. And we're going to be taking our stitches off at the same time we're making them. So let's begin. Insert into the next stitch, work a simple stitch, and then pull it through the loop on your hook. That's one. Insert into the next stitch, work a simple stitch, and then pull the loop through the loop on your hook, taking it down to one loop. You're going to continue that across. So that was our second simple stitch. That's 3, 4, and 5. Now we're going to work one purl stitch in each of the next 5 stitches. Insert into the next stitch and work a purl stitch. That's 1, and then pull that loop through the loop on your hook. Work a purl stitch into the next stitch, and then pull that loop through the loop on your hook. That's 3, then pull through the loop on your hook, taking that stitch off. Four, and 5. Now you're going to work 5 simple stitches, one in each of the next 5 stitches, and you're taking them off at the same time. Insert into that next vertical bar, work your simple stitch, and then pull it through the loop on your hook. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Now we're going to work a purl stitch in the next 4 stitches and taking them off at the same time. That's 1, 2, 3, and 4. We're over to our last vertical bar. Insert into that last vertical bar, and then in the one below it, behind it, yarn over, pull through those 2 bars, and pull through the loop on your hook. So I'm going to fasten off. I chain 2. I pull up on my hook and pull the yarn out. I grab that piece of yarn, take my 2 fingers, and then I pull down, and it knots my work. So someone asked me to show how I fastened off. I'm not sure how I learned that method, but that's how I do it. So this is what our stitch pattern looks like. Again, you're going to work rows 1 through 12, And then to make your project longer, you're going to start and repeat rows 3 through 12 to the length desired. You can end on any row you choose, and then when you do your finishing row, use the next row to work off your stitches. So if you end on row 12, you need to go to row 3 and follow row 3 to take your loops off. If you end on row 5, use row 6 to take your loops off. Just continue that pattern so you have this nice ending of the pattern. If you do not end in that manner using the next row, then your first row will be all simple Tunisian stitches, and it will not look right because you'll have one solid row of the simple stitches. That's why you need to jump to that next row to take your loops off for that finishing row. So thank you everyone for stopping by today. I hope you enjoyed this video. Again, here is my blue sample we just made. Here is the white sample if you like that crisp clean white. This is a self-striping sample, which I absolutely love. And then this was my sample using the multi-short color bursts. So all kinds of different views on how this stitch looks. So here's the samples of my stitch. This stitch pattern is a free stitch pattern. The link to the pattern is in my description box, or you can go to www.creativegrandma.net, click on Stitch of the Week, scroll down to whichever stitch you wish to use, click on the name of the stitch. The file will show up in a little box at the bottom left of your screen. Click on that box and you can download it right to your computer. Please let me know what you thought of this stitch pattern in the comments section. I like your feedback so I know in which direction to try to come up with unique stitch patterns for you to try to learn, and that helps me know what you're looking for. Thanks again everybody, and until next time, happy crocheting!